All right, here we go.
Hi there, Shannon.
Hey there. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So I'm excited that we got back on track to have a little live today and talk about something that's been popping up in a lot of my conversations.
Me
And that's the
too.
big four-letter word, starts with F, fear.
Oh, that four-letter word.
Yeah, it seems like it just keeps coming up in a lot of conversations. I mean, we all have fears. We all have moments where we get stuck in fear. And for clients, considering job switches or really wanting to lean into their job, that pulls up a lot of fears in us.
Mhm.
And I thought maybe we could chat through some tips and strategies about how to pull ourselves out of that fear.
Yeah, I like it, and I think it's good to talk about it because as we see often, people are often isolated in their fear. And they think that everyone else has it all together, everyone else is just charging along, and we are lucky that we live in a time where people are more willing to be vulnerable and more willing to share about mental health or things that maybe before were kept a little bit more hidden. And so, but I do still think that for the most part, people tend to keep their fears a little tucked away and often find themselves alone in the experience. So I love that we're taking some time to chat about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I always think of it as being kind of locked in a cage of our fear and that
Yeah.
it's invisible to others and it really stops us. And what was interesting to me, I started doing a little bit of reading about fear and what's really happening in the body, because we all know when we get really, really scared of something, if we don't like public speaking and we think we have to give a presentation, we have a physical response, right?
Oh, I've
We
had that.
yeah. You and I both can relate to that. We immediately might get sweaty palms or racing heart rate. Same thing when thinking about talking to our boss about a raise, negotiating a new salary. We start to have this physical response. And what I read didn't surprise me, but it's just shocking anyways. We are actually having the same physical response that we do when we're excited. When
Mm.
we're like pumped about doing something, our heart races and we get really in this moment. And in that moment, we're just ready to go. But when the fear is there and we get, that racing heartbeat, we stop.
Mm.
And so what can you do in that
Well,
moment?
even before, what can you
Yeah.
do? How would someone be able to distinguish the excitement versus the fear?
Well, I think it is in just that. And it's something you and I talk about all the time. It's the story that's happening in your mind as
Mm.
well as the physical response.
Mm.
So the story of someone who likes to go on a roller coaster, it's like, oh wow, here we go, and the seatbelts are on and we're on our way, and I'm so excited, and your heart's racing. The other story of the person next to you who hates roller coasters is like, oh my God, I'm locked in here, and here we go. And they're going to have the same kind of heart racing and that type of thing. So it's the story that you're telling.
Yeah.
And ultimately, with fear, we're afraid of a risk that we think is in front of us that we're taking, where we're going to be unsafe.
Yeah, it reminds me of hearing like performers
Mm.
or athletes, people who kind of have to, um, in real time kind of rise to occasions or put themselves really out there or in front of a lot of people. And they do describe it as, that feeling of nerves or fear is there's a very thin line between that and like adrenaline. And I think, what often successful performers talk about is learning how to channel that energy. And what I hear you saying is like part of learning how to channel that is also, what is the meaning you're making of, what this fear is all about.
Yeah, 100%. And one way to think yourself through that is to assess the risk. So when we get scared, we also get into the fight or flight mode, right? So adrenaline is pumping there, and then we stop using anything other than kind of our gut instincts, which tell
Mm-hmm.
us be afraid. there is a risk.
There is danger.
Your boss is in front of you. You are sitting down, and this is going to go poorly.
Yeah.
And that's actually not true if you have assessed the risk, right? So what's the worst thing? I could say something I don't want to say to my boss. Well, if I've prepared for that and assessed what really happens when I sit down in this moment before I get in the moment, then I can do what? This is what we talk about all the time. I can be intentional when I'm facing that fear.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, especially for those types of situations or scenarios where we do have some sort of runway, but between now and when the event is about to happen, we do get the privilege of or the opportunity to take some time to think about, how do I want to show up, right? How do I want to be intentional? What's the goal or the ideal outcome for this thing that feels very scary, and allowing yourself to kind of think through what are the potential possibilities. I remember hearing Michael Phelps, the gold medal swimmer, how he would rehearse over and over and over again, like what the perfect swim looked like or the perfect lap. And then would also rehearse like all the possibilities of what could go wrong. And then practiced how he would respond or how he would react in the moment, and did it over and over and over again, like visualizing it to the point where it became like muscle memory. And obviously that's not necessary for some of the situations that our clients are in, but I thought that was really powerful. Like, how could you begin to start visualizing how you want something to play out if it feels really scary?
Yeah, and there's two tips within that story, right? Assessing what could really go wrong, as well as what could really go right. So assessing the risk, and then thinking about the outcome you want instead. And then his technique allowed him to build skills to do that, right? And that's possible for all of us when it's a fear that pops up all the time. And that's what I do hear from clients. I'm curious if your clients share with you the same thing. It's often the same fear that's coming up. And it's often the same one they've had their whole lives. They didn't want to talk to their teacher about a bad grade. They didn't want to talk about, a project that they felt like they were a failure at early on. Talking to somebody in a position where they might be criticized is this fear that's popped up their whole life. So they're familiar with it, right?
Yeah, sometimes I do notice that sometimes these fears, and we've been talking about this more recently too, can be a little hidden. They can be, these self-limiting beliefs or fears that are actually a little underneath our conscious, right? They're kind of tucked into our subconscious, and they're old, right? They, came from childhood, a bad experience with a teacher, right? Or a parent, or, a peer that, now has you playing small or not wanting to take risks or prioritizing safety over everything else. And so sometimes they see these fears as blocks that are showing up that people aren't necessarily totally aware of. And I think that's an interesting kind of spin on, okay, the first scenario is something we know is coming. We're scared to do it. How do we prepare and set some intentions for how we want to show up? What are your thoughts on these fears that might be, hidden or not as visible to someone, but they're very much present in their life?
Yeah. And that rings true to me. I can think of a lot of situations I've heard of about that from clients and myself too. And one of the strategies that I read about in preparing for our conversation today was to be sure not to completely avoid a fear throughout your life. Let me just unpack that in regards to what you said. Is anytime we want to grow, or anytime we feel ourselves in a familiar situation where we're not actually stepping into our power, or we're not stepping into who we are or going after that goal, we do have some of those subconscious fears pop up that hold us in that safety line, or we feel is safety. I think that's what you're talking about. And so the strategy of making sure that you are not completely avoiding your fear is a way to be, again, intentional and thinking about, why does this keep happening? Is there a fear underlining this? And is that fear actually driving a lot of these behaviors that either feel similar or have similar outcomes? Right?
Yeah.
Then trying to figure out a strategy once you've defined what's happening there, and try to figure out a strategy to help push through that fear.
Yeah. And I think some ways you can be identifying if you have some fears that may be operating underneath the surface is, one, kind of paying attention to, all parts of your life. And are there parts of your life where you're feeling unsatisfied, or you're feeling like something's missing, or you're maybe not showing up as fully as you want? That's a good place to do some investigating. And then the other thing I think you can be paying attention to is like your self-talk, right? Like how you're talking to yourself often holds a lot of clues as to what we believe to be true about life, about ourselves, and what's possible. So those might be some good ways to investigate if some fears might be looming under the surface.
I actually have a personal story that really resonates with. Last week, I played in like a small tennis tournament, and I love to play tennis, but I was playing with people who were better than me. And I got out there and was just making miserable shots. And the voice in my head was like, oh, you're getting outplayed. Oh, you knew this. And I thought about it and I heard it and I thought, I'm going to stop that. And so I just started saying things to myself that were like, oh, you're going to do so good. You're going to do so good. And immediately my game changed. And I ended up, it was 2 hours of tennis, and I ended up playing. I felt well for myself. I felt proud walking off the court. And it was one of those times where I was like, oh, this stuff is so good. Being intentional, knowing what you're saying to yourself, because it doesn't sound loud all the time. It's very quiet, but it's very influential.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, that's an in the moment, ability, because you've been building that muscle.
100%.
Right?
And that actually brings me to another strategy. Is a lot of times people have fears and they will say, I just need to be positive. And they'll just try to push this kind of toxic positivity that actually is just trying to paint over the feeling. And that's not helpful. And so that actually can be detrimental, because it's almost like you're just charging through, and you might have a bad situation that proves to yourself like, oh, that is scary and that did go wrong, and don't do that again. So one way to really be able to be aware of this, if you feel like it's happening and you have fears and you want to discover more, is to talk to someone. It's not easy to go through this alone. It happens, as you said in the beginning, it's very private, these internal voices of ourselves. If you have a really good friend, that's a great outlet. Obviously, if it's career-based, a career coach can be so helpful, but also a therapist. Being able to identify this and build strategies and work through, then you get to do it in the moment and feel, like you are facing your fears more easily. It always comes up,
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, especially when there's some of those deep-rooted fears, they often go back to something that happened in childhood. And it's about kind of taking some time to understand, like, where did the initial wound happen, right? Because we're making sense of the world, from 0 to 7, and often sometimes innocuous events that happen really form our life views and, how we kind of show up and operate and what we believe to be true. And so if we don't take the time to really investigate and go back to, like, where did that come from? Is that actually true? Does this belief or this thought or this fear actually feel true to me today? Right? And even bigger question, is this thought, this fear, this belief aligned with the life I want to live, the career I want to have, who I want to be. Because I think this is where a lot of our clients find themselves kind of stuck or, you know, experiencing blocks, is that they have a vision or a dream of a life and a career that they want to create or build, and they can't quite get there. And oftentimes what emerges is there's some old fears, there's some old beliefs that have not been updated, right? That are still playing a big role in the decisions they're making, the choices they're making, what they believe to be possible for themselves. And until they kind of get in there and start to really look at what's playing, and, you know, taking the time to update those operating systems and, you know, face some of those fears, they're going to continue to, you know, like you said, come up against that fear over and over in all these different parts of their life.
Yeah. I mean, you just said it 100%. We actually develop our subconscious by the time we're 7. And if we don't spend time updating that and actually know what's coming from that original little person in us, then we actually allow that little person to guide us through life. And
Right.
something that pops up so much with clients who feel stuck. Oh, do I believe that?
Mm-hmm.
And could I believe differently? And how can I build a knowledge base and new muscle memory around that? Yeah, I love all this stuff.
Yeah, we were just going to do a quick live. So any last thoughts or tips you want to leave people with if they think they might be, you know, wrestling with some fears?
Well, a couple that have popped up today is to, number one, you know, evaluate what the risk is. If you know what the fear is, evaluate what the risk is, and then try to, you know, build a schedule around how you'll deal with it, build skills, those types of things. If it's something that feels familiar, but it's elusive, you know, talking to a therapist, talking to a career coach can be so helpful. But I think the biggest thing is self-discovery and exploration, finding ways that feel true to you, to think about who you are and how you came to be who you are today through books, through podcasts, through coaching, therapy. All those things can help you to understand yourself better.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. Well, we'll be back soon with some more Facebook Lives. We hope everyone's doing well out there, and hopefully this inspired you to maybe face some of your fears. So good luck.
Definitely. Take care, everyone.
Take care.